Hello, I'm Aziz Haniffa. Today we are thrilled to be in San Francisco at the home of Indiaspora founder and angel investor and philanthropist M.R. Rangaswami. Madhavan Rangaswami, but popularly known as MR. MR, thank you very much for inviting us to your home. And let's start off by speaking about your American journey. Tell us your story. I believe you came in 1976 because this was the time of emergency in India. Things were rather bleak. Things were uncertain. And your brother, who had just completed his PhD in upstate New York, had said, come on over.
Thanks, Aziz. Thanks for having me. I was a law student at that time. I got disillusioned because of what was going on in India. Yeah. So I had completed 2 years of law, which is the BGL degree, Bachelor of General Law. Yeah. Then I thought maybe it's time to go find something else.
Yeah, and this was after you had done bachelor's in accounting at Madras College.
Yeah. And again, I've never found life yet, right?
Yes.
So I wanted to be an accountant. Yeah. I did that, didn't like it. I was doing law. I didn't like that either. And that's when my brother said, hey, why don't you come try an MBA? I thought that grass would be greener on the other side. Little did I find out later, grass was greener on the other side. Yeah. So I had to come on the student visa, but with only $8. Yes. Because in those days, if you remember, yes, the Indian government didn't have any foreign exchange. And so everybody just got $8. So we were called the $8 men in those days.
And you landed in New York?
And I landed in New York City. Yeah. With $8, right? Yeah. But then my brother had a friend's brother who lived in New Jersey. That's how it worked in those days. Yes. There were no cell phones, nothing. So he said, my brother's brother, my friend's brother would meet you there. Yeah. So just show up at JFK. So here we are in this crowded place in JFK trying to find each other, right? I have no idea how we all found each other, but we did. And that was my entry. And then I had to take a Greyhound bus. I don't think people today would know what that is. I had to take a Greyhound bus to go to upstate New York, to my brother's place. And then from there, I prepared to go over to Kent State University, which was in Ohio. Yes. Taking another bus. Yeah. You know, so this was my introduction to the United States, was Greyhound.
And Kent State University, which had a lot of history.
Kent State University had a notoriety, if you will. You know, there was agitation and students were killed in 1970, and I was going there in 1976. So there was a little bit of trepidation, you know, what was going on there and stuff. But I did end up there, and I did have a very interesting adventure on the way as well.
Please.
Because what happened was my sister-in-law had packed a box of pots, pans, Indian spices, which were much in demand for me so that I could cook. I'm a vegetarian. So she had made all this stuff and she wanted me to take it with me, right? So on the Greyhound bus, someone decides to take my box. So I end up at Kent State with only my clothes, but no cooking stuff.
Wow. So you would have rather not had the clothes, but the spices.
Exactly. I'm like, how do I eat tonight? So my host family then, and this showed the warmth and hospitality of America. That is still there today, I believe. Where my host family immediately went to Kmart, brought me all the pots, bought all the pots and pans, and brought it back to me. Although they couldn't get the spices. They could get the curry powder and the turmeric and all that stuff. But
because there weren't Patel Brothers and other stores.
There was
nothing.
So, but I felt at home. I felt accepted, warm. You know, people were reaching out to me when I needed something. Right. So that still has stayed home with me.
So fast forward, you do an MBA at Kent State. You get a job in Houston, Texas. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So again, this was 1978, 79. The country was not doing that well, especially Ohio was in a recession. And so I had to leave town. I had a friend again in Houston. Again, this is the power of the diaspora. There was a friend who was living in Houston, had a job. So I called him up and he says, hey, just take a flight down here. There are lots of jobs available. It was booming in the oil field industry, oil industry. So I went down and within a week I had a job. Whereas in Ohio, I couldn't get a job. So I just moved to Houston. Again, my friends there were so accepting and warm and welcoming. They even co-signed getting my loan on my first car because I didn't have any money, right? And you couldn't buy a car. So this is all that happens to immigrants when you go to a new country. People help each other, right? And that's what I felt. And so I got a job in Houston. It was a nice, comfortable job in manufacturing. But then once I went for a training, and there was a consultant, and he was talking to me, and he said, "What have you done?" And I told him my studies, what I'd studied. I told him what I was working at. He says, "You need to go to Silicon Valley." And that felt like this movie Graduate, where the guy tells him, "Benjamin, you need to get into plastics." That was my plastics moment when he said, "You got to be in Silicon Valley." Keep in mind, this is 1982. How do you find out what Silicon Valley is? I lived 1,500 miles away. There was no internet, no Facebook, no LinkedIn. You know, so I went to the library and got microfiche documents. For those of you who don't know microfiche, these are archived documents stored on plastic that you have to kind of go through and find out the articles. So that's how I found a list of companies that might be in Silicon Valley that might be hiring. And I wrote all of them, you know, using regular snail mail, as they call it.
And in the meantime, you had done some computer courses also.
I was using computers in my job because it was inventory management and scheduling and optimization, and I'd used software there. And so I had some experience in software. And so there was one company crazy enough in Silicon Valley to call me, do a phone interview, and they liked me enough that they flew me out to the Bay Area and gave me a job. So I really, really lucked out, and I called myself the accidental, you know, capitalist or accidental philanthropist that landed up in Silicon Valley.
And as karma would have it, you then started working for Oracle. And had your working space was right next to the CEO, Ellison, and he took you in, and he was your mentor. Speak to us about that.
Absolutely. I wish it was that simple getting to him, but my path was kind of journey was circuitous, right? So first I ended up in a startup, and you have to understand Silicon Valley. You know, startups look really good when you get started. You know, this company went up and up and up. In 3 years, it went from $1 million to 10 million. It was a great company, and then it went chapter 11, right? And that's the journey of Silicon Valley. So here I was saying, I'm in Silicon Valley, had my first startup experience. It was not good.
And then you're wondering, what do I do now?
And then what I was doing, and then I'd actually gone to work for Deloitte after that because I had a partner there who said, "You're so good at computers, why don't you come be a management consultant?" So I was doing that for a couple of years when I got a phone call from my prior boss, who was in the previous software company, who had gone to a little company called Oracle. And he said, "You know what, this guy Larry Ellison, he needs people who are experts in application software, manufacturing, financial, human resource applications, you know all that stuff. And so why don't you come work with us?" And that's how I got to Oracle. And Oracle was a small company, and we only had a small office, and everybody doubled up on cubicles. And I was lucky my cubicle was outside Larry's office. So I got to meet him and really work closely with him and see what a bright, smart man he was. And I learned a lot from him. And of course, he took a liking to me, and soon, you know, if Larry likes you, you moved up in the organization. And within a couple of years, I was a vice president, launching applications for Oracle.
And then why did you leave Oracle?
I had the startup bug again. Again, when a company, Oracle had grown to $1 billion in size, it was a big company with thousands of employees, and I really got the startup bug again, and I went to work for a startup, again, starting at that $1 million mark and trying to grow. And again, being, you know, Silicon Valley type company, in 3 years, it did really well, and it went broke as well. So again, the path in Silicon Valley is treacherous. You fail a lot, and that's what happened to me twice. Then what happened was...
And you were there at the start of the technology revolution in Silicon Valley too.
Absolutely.
This was the absolute beginnings of it.
Steve Jobs got this little computer, and he was telling us what a great thing is, what it was going to change the world. Larry Ellison was going to say the same thing. Everybody was saying the same. You had no idea in 1982, Oracle was $1 million company. I think Apple might have been a few $100 million in size.
And then you kept on going with startups and then became an angel investor. How did that all metamorphose?
Right. So what happened after this company went broke, I was approached by another company I'd kept in touch with and with the investors to become the chief marketing officer of a company which was going to go public. So I was brought on board as the management team to strengthen the management team, to kind of file the prospectus, to do the roadshow, and be part of that team that took the company public. So again, this was like the Super Bowl moment, right? There are lots and lots of startups, very few go public. I had the opportunity now to take a company public, and that's what I did. And I was lucky enough, the stock of this company, I got the options at 25 cents a share. Within a year, the stock of the company was $50 a share. Wow. I don't know what that is in math, 200 times what I'd got now to be, right? So that was the time I decided that I needed to raise a family and have a family, and I was traveling. The previous year, I'd traveled 300,000 miles. Okay, it got to a point where I couldn't start a family, and the reason I quit that company was to start a family, but also to be with my children, if I had any. Because in my childhood, when I grew up in India, I lost my father when I was 10 years old. So not having a father myself, I said if I was going to have a family, I was going to be kind of a stay-at-home dad. Yeah. And that was one of the reasons I left this company, even though I left millions of dollars of stock options on the table. I said if I'm going to start a family, I want to have a different lifestyle. And I didn't know what I was going to do at that time. I just quit. And our first child was going to be born. And that was the status I was in. This angel investing, again, came by accident. Like I said, most of my life has been an accident. Yeah. I wanted to be an accountant, a lawyer, an MBA, manufacturing, tech. Yeah. It just went all over the US,
go to Houston, then go to Silicon Valley.
Silicon Valley and all this stuff. Yeah. So a friend of mine, I'd met with him, and he said, hey, there are a lot of these young companies. Maybe we should go take a look at investing in these companies. And that's how I got into it. And that's how I became an angel investor before the term was coined. And then what happened was an editor I knew at the Wall Street Journal found out what I was doing. He said, this is weird. Nobody's done something like this. We have venture capitalists, but nothing with people who just invest their own money in startups. So he said, do you mind if I send a reporter and that person follows you for a couple of days? I didn't think anything of it. Yeah. And the reporter calls me and says, I'm flying out from New York. Do you mind if I spent 2 days following you and shadowing you? Yeah. So I talked to my wife, and she said it's okay. And so she followed me for 2 days. It ended up, she wrote an article, and she was going to put it in section C of the Wall Street Journal, which is the technology section, if you remember.
Yes.
But when she submitted the story, the editors loved it so much,
they said, we're going to
put it on the page one in column A1, which is where they profile people. And so one morning, the previous weekend, she called and said, look for the story Monday. So I didn't think anything of it. I'm not even a Wall Street Journal subscriber. And so on Monday morning at 6 a.m., my phone rings, and I pick up the phone. I'm sleeping, and a friend from New York goes, hey, you're on the front page of the Journal. I'm like, what? So then I had to go down to the corner grocery store to buy the Journal. And so I go there and pick up a couple of copies, bring it to the front. And the guy goes, that's you on the front page. I'm like, wow, this is my 15 minutes.
I'm a celebrity now.
I'm a celebrity, So that was my 15 minutes of fame, becoming an angel investor, which they had found was a new category of investment.
And we South Asians, tend to be, conservative, risk averse. Most people would have stayed on, perhaps with Oracle or perhaps with some of the companies that were doing well, risen through the ranks, ultimately becoming, CTO, CEO, etc. But you took a different path altogether. Why?
Yeah, I, after being in the Valley and stuff for 14 years, like I said, my focus was on the family. And I said, I have to make changes, and that's why I did it. Because becoming a CEO, I'd have traveled 500,000 miles a year. I would never seen my kids. Whereas now I got to grow up come to San Francisco, have my kids grow up with me, take them to school, do different things, and I was like a stay-at-home. We were stay-at-home parents, both of us.
And you married a Greek American. I met your wife. She's a delightful person. We've had so many chats about music, etc. How did that come about? What was about that love story? Tell us about it.
Again, that was an accident. I was living in Houston, and my friend was going to do a party for his friend, and she happened to live in an apartment, and my wife was her roommate. And so I ended up meeting her at a party. And so, it's all accidental and serendipity that happens in life,
And talk about your daughters too. I know they are amazingly terrific people, who think well beyond their years. And I know you have a perfect relationship with them too. And you travel a lot. It was reminiscent of the old movie, if it's Tuesday, it must be Belgium. Or maybe around the world with in 80 days with Phileas Fogg and Passepartout.
Yeah, I would say, with my kids, I brought them up along with my wife. And we always used to take 3 months off in the summer because I live in San Francisco, and the summer is the worst season to be here. It's cold and foggy, so every summer we would go off. And over the dozen years, we traveled to about 40 countries during the summertime with the kids, being very close to them. And they both kind of were influenced, I guess, by the things I used to do. My older daughter was very influenced by the work I do in the sustainability space. As you know, I run a forum called the Corporate Eco Forum, where we bring together 70 of the world's largest companies, their chief sustainability officers, to help mitigate climate risk. And so she was taken up by that. She got her bachelor's in organismal biology, and now she's doing a master's in climate science and biology and wants to do a PhD in that field. And so she was influenced by that, and as part of her journey, we decided to climb Mount Kilimanjaro to bring attention to all the deforestation that was happening in Tanzania at that time. And so we climbed Kilimanjaro to raise money so that they could plant hundreds of thousands of new trees in Kilimanjaro to sustain nature there. And so that's how she was influenced by me. And then she's subsequently gone on to Antarctica. She's gone on to swim from Alcatraz to San Francisco. So again, she's in that field. My younger one just graduated, and she got a Fulbright to go study in India on women's issues and issues that are of importance to the Gen Z group. And so again, it's nice to have been with them during their young days and now see them blossom into their own.
And you spoke about the Corporate Trade Forum that you hold annual meetings. And this has grown to be huge. Tell us about it and what really happens there.
Yeah, we've had it almost 15 years. So it's a group of 70 chief sustainability officers. These are Fortune 100 class companies. So the total revenues, combined revenues of this group is about 5 trillion. So they're almost like one of the largest economies in the world. And we work with them on reducing greenhouse gases, increasing their renewable energy purchases, building sustainable supply chains. So that's the forum that I started and founded almost 15 years ago. But my passion is, as you know, Aziz, is to build networks. But that was only the second network I built. The first network I built was in the tech space, which I grew up in. So I still run a network called Enterprise, which is for the top 100 CEOs in the software industry. So we bring them together once a year, and all the profits of that event go back to nonprofits. So we've had the likes of all the leaders in technology come and speak and be part of this 2.5-day retreat. It's closed door, and then we've given away over $2 million to different nonprofits that surround the tech sector. So my passion is always, build networks that make an impact, help people, and then grow those industries and those communities.
And in that sphere and in that forum, since you get a lot of Indian Americans, South Asian Americans involved in the tech sector, is there a lot of synergy between India and the US too?
Absolutely, absolutely. One of the ways I've given back is not just run this enterprise forum, but also go back to India. I've been doing this for 12 years, to go back to India to work on a tech entrepreneurship forum in India that I've been hosting in conjunction with NASSCOM. And over time, we've educated thousands of people to become entrepreneurs, to help them really focus on what they want to do, to bring delegations from the US to inspire them, do boot camps and workshops to really create an ecosystem, which you now see is starting to flourish in India. So that was all part of giving back.
And is this also a labor of love for you, because you've come full circle? You were mentored by the likes of Ellison, and now here you are, in a way, mentoring all these people through some of the organizations that you have convened, and also on a personal basis. Why is mentoring so important as it was to you?
Yeah, because first of all, I didn't know I needed a mentor. So I got a mentor along the way, and then a second one a little bit later, and I said, it would have helped me so much if I had one when I was in college or in high school. And so I saw the benefits myself of what mentoring can do and how they can be helpful to you. And since I was mentored by people, that was one way for me to give back. And so over the past 25 years, I at least meet 2 entrepreneurs a week, one-on-one, either breakfast, lunch, or dinner, now more through Zoom, but give them feedback on their business plan, help them with connections, introduce them to investors, and so on and so forth. So that's just become part of my daily ritual, is meeting these people, mentoring them, helping them be more successful with nothing to expect in return.
37 years after you came to the US, you suddenly called me once and said, Aziz, I want to meet up with you and pick your brains and come and meet you in Washington. And we met, and here you were talking about a new organization you wanted to form called Indiaspora. And you had this, what I thought was a pretty interesting strategy. There was some low-hanging fruit, in terms of someone wanting to have a Diwali stamp in view of the Indian American contributions to this country and why Diwali was so important. What was the rationale behind that Diwali stamp?
Yeah, again, I wish it was low-hanging fruit because I thought maybe it was low-hanging fruit.
But I know.
Once I got involved, I found out that the community had been trying to get this for 10 years.
Yeah.
We thought going in it would be relatively easy, but once I dug into it, I found out it had 3-4 iterations. It had not succeeded because the post office had an opaque advisory council. They would get 10,000 requests a year and 25 got selected. It was actually worse than being an investor and trying to invest in a company, right? It was so hard to pick the winners. So what we did when we came, we used a 3-prong approach. So I went and met with President Obama. He says, I'm fully for it, MR, go get it. Then we introduced symbolic legislation in the House and Senate. I became a lobbyist for a few months, walking the halls. I didn't realize what tough work that was, being a lobbyist, free of charge in this case, right?
Which makes it even worse.
And then the final thing was to get the community to write 20,000 letters and postcards. That was the toughest. We went to temples and gurdwaras and different places, community organizations, to get them all to write, and we succeeded in filling up the desk of the Postmaster General. That's what it took to get a stamp. That's when I understood how complicated Washington was. And I was thinking, why did I even take on this effort? It took us 2.5 years after we took it on. But what it did was, it was a feel-good moment for the community. Everybody starts using it. People then took the stamp and used it for other purposes. For example, in New York City, they went to different school districts, showed everybody the stamp and said, now it's a mainstream holiday. Now they got Diwali as a holiday in many of the school districts. So the stamp not only helped us feel good, but
now this also in a way was sort of the launching pad of Indiaspora. And just a housekeeping, how did the name Indiaspora come into being?
Yeah, this was a bittersweet moment for me because we had an old name, and I'll divulge the name for a minute. I don't think people have heard the story. But the working title for Indiaspora was Congress of 100. And the reason is there was a committee of 100 that the Chinese Americans had formed with people like I.M. Pei and Yo-Yo Ma that was doing extremely well. So we said, that was a good name. We'll call it Congress. And then we also studied the Jewish diaspora, and they helped us as well.
That template and all that.
Template and everything, right? But Congress of 100 sounded good till people said, are you part of the Indian National Congress? And things like that. Then we said, oh man, that's not going to work. So then I was talking to my nephew, who is a professor at Duke, and we were brainstorming at midnight, one night, and then he came up with, why don't we say, then we talked about India and diaspora, and he says, what about Indiaspora? And I'm like, that's brilliant. And he said, Dia is in the middle, which is all the hope and bright and goodness and everything. And that's how we came up. But unfortunately, my nephew, who coined the word, his name was Srinivas Aravamudan, who was a professor at Duke, passed away a few years later because of brain cancer.
And Indiaspora today has become an iconic organization. And you yourself, there is no denying, MR, that you are a very consequential Indian American leader today. Because there have been a lot of Indian American organizations, big and small, but mostly parochial, mostly with individual leaders, and they haven't had the influence and sort of the power of sustainability that Indiaspora has had. What do you credit that to?
Yeah, I think the first thing, I've been always an entrepreneur, having created enterprise CEO retreats and the Eco Forum and such. So every time I do this, I go study the market. So I went and talked to over 100 community leaders before I even started Indiaspora. And by learning from all these people, I learned that the Indian community was siloed. We had the Gujarati Samaj or the Tamil Sangam, or we had organizations like AHOA for the hotel owners and API for the doctors,
then Tana, the Bengali
and Saba for the lawyers and so forth. They did a nice job in their own fields, but there was nothing that was like the Uber of the community, brought everybody together. So the first thing I did was to get the input of community leaders and invite 100 of them to come to upstate New York, to Mohawk, to have the first retreat to see what we do. Right? So we involved everybody from the start. It wasn't my idea, my vision was getting 100 people to do this.
Strictly brainstorming.
Strictly brainstorming. 3 things came out of that. One was political and civic engagement. The community there, when we met, felt like we needed to have people represent us in Congress. When in 2012, when we met, we were all saying we're 1% of the population. We looked around and we said that we're 0% of Congress. So how do we get people into Congress? That was a big deal. Right? So the second thing was around entrepreneurship and innovation. There were so many successful Indian entrepreneurs here. We said we have to give that back. We have to distill the best practices and give it to India and give it to other diasporas where there was not enough entrepreneurship knowledge. And then the final thing was to be philanthropic, because we said the community was very rich. We're the highest earning demographic in the US. That means we don't want to be known as takers, we want to be known as givers. And so a big part of that is being philanthropic. We decided to form an organization which was very different than the other groups, which is other groups are volunteer driven, Indiaspora is staff driven. And what do I mean by that? So the community becomes members. People become members of Indiaspora, and they give contributions of anywhere from $5,000 to $25,000 per year. We have different levels of membership. And the organization hires and has hired a professional team. So when members see an issue or need something done, they call the team, and the team drives the initiatives, drives the work, does the work. As opposed to volunteer-driven, where volunteers are doing things part-time.
And at their own time.
At their own time, and you have 100 different ideas. Here we coalesced around 3 buckets, and we said, let's go do those things, do them professionally. So that's the sustainable model we have established, very different than other organizations you see in the community.
And driving philanthropy among Indian Americans and purposeful philanthropy has become a huge and integral part of Indiaspora. So was it also to get the message out that, look, it's not all temples and mosques and gurdwaras, and also money going to India to help villagers build temples and, of course, educational institutions. Here in America, we are also going to be involved in a lot of philanthropy. Was that sort of the overall strategy?
Yeah, so we did a survey. Before we did anything, we said, let's go find out the facts. The fact was we were not punching above our weight or even our own weight. We could do more. The second thing was we were volunteer driven. We gave a lot of time, but not enough money. And so we said, let's set that course correct. So we did the survey, and based on that, we started a program called Chalo Give, as you know, which is an online campaign by Indiaspora that gets the community to write anywhere from $5 to whatever, $5 million, hopefully one day, right? And so what we decided to do there was we needed role models. So we have created a list of 100 of the top Indian philanthropists. We've created a group of organizations you can give to. We've collated, for example, during COVID, not only did we raise $5 million to give back, but our network of organizations donated another $10 million to money. We also then were able to collect all the good work done around COVID and project that to the overall community. Because, someone in New York didn't know what someone did in San Francisco, didn't know what someone did in Chicago. So collating, disseminating information to the public. Same thing. We had given, do you know, Aziz, over $1 billion to higher education in this country in the past 20 years. Over $1 billion, nobody knew it. We collated a report and we sent it to the top 100 universities, presidents, to let them know we give money to institutions and let the public know that. So again, part of it is telling the story that the Jewish community has done well, and we learned from them, because when we worked with them, they said, you not only got to do things, you got to tell people you do things. That's why we now have a list of the top business leaders. We have over 60 people in the Fortune 500 who are CEOs. We have now 200 politicians across the world of Indian origin. So Indiaspora has published these lists and disseminated this. So the overall community of the diaspora and others where we live in, other societies we live in, will all know the power of our community, but also know that we are givers.
But in 2013, with the second coming of Obama, you all had an Indiaspora ball,
right,
which was a wonderful experience because none in the Indian American community or the South Asian American community had this kind of an inaugural ball. And it was attended by congressmen, senators, senior cabinet officials, the who's who of the community. What was the rationale behind it? Because I know that in a way catapulted the community into greater heights.
Yeah. A little known fact, even our current vice president came to that ball.
Yes, yes.
So again, the reason for doing that was in 2012 when we had met, we said we're 1% of the population, we needed to be 1% of Congress. So we want to be a catalyst. We cannot donate money to politicians. So we said, let's be a catalyst. And that was one of the drivers to do a ball, was to showcase that Indian Americans are strong, both in terms of contributing money to politicians, but we had politicians who are aspiring to be in the Congress and so forth, right? So that was the reason we did it, was to showcase both our strength, but also our aspirations to be there. And lo and behold, within 3 election cycles, Aziz, we were 1% of Congress, and we did the Indiaspora Gala to celebrate that. But even the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, and many others came to recognize and congratulate the community that in 6 short years, we had 5 people in Congress, which was 1%, which was our population. So it can be done. So Indiaspora is a catalyst that gets people to do things, and that's what we showed here.
And now, in terms of where Indiaspora goes from here, you are now getting Indiaspora chapters in various parts of the world. It's sort of a global Indiaspora now. What drives you to do that?
Keep in mind, we have 32 million of us in the diaspora that live outside of India and have Indian roots, right? And we live in 30, 40 different countries of consequence. So how do we connect this diaspora? Because we can be a force for good. The tagline for Indiaspora is force for good. So how can this community rise up in the new world order to be known as people who do good things? So there are 32 million of us, and there are 5 countries that are consequential in this group because it's the 80-20 rule. So you have the US, Canada, UK, Singapore, and UAE. You take these 5 diasporas, they have tremendous success, tremendous wealth, tremendous political clout, and influence. So we want to start with those 5 countries and have 5 different chapters, to have 5 powerful chapters, and then connect that to the homeland. So the goal is to connect India to the 5 most powerful diasporas and be a force for good. But the other thing is also to take care of where we live. So at the same time, we have a program called Give Where We Live. So we also want to do things where we live in terms of philanthropy, but we also want to support India, which was the motherland. So again, we're straddling the 2 fences, if you will.
And in that regard, we belong to sort of the baby boomer generation. Then there was the Gen X, the Gen Z, the millennials. How are you all incorporating them also to play a role? Because one of the problems that Indian American organizations have had is some of the older generations have held on for too long. They haven't incorporated the younger generation, the millennials, etc., as much as they want.
So good question, Aziz, because when we started Indiaspora, we had 2 basic goals in mind as well. One was gender equality, not diversity. And we are not there at 50-50. We're at about 33% women, which is not bad, but we still need to get to 50. And the other thing we said is 10% of participants should be under 35. We set a goal. And to further that goal, we've set up a new group within Indiaspora called Diaspora Next. And this is for people 35 and under to get together because their aspirations are different, their perspectives are different, their outlook is different. They don't, kind of look at the world like you and I. And so you'll see more and more come out of that, where they're running their own group per se. We don't want them always to be led by us because they don't want to really be in that mode. And so we have started that effort as well. So more things to come in that space over the next few years.
Thank you very much, MR. It's delightful to be here and, spent a lot of time on your deck overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. So thank you very much for a delightful opportunity. Oh, thanks again. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Aziz.
Yeah. Thank you very much, viewers. And this is another episode of the Trailblazers. And we'll be back again soon.